No, it does not mean an end of the Kenai Fish Wars.
Coming up on Frontiers, setnetters won the battle in the Alaska Supreme Court, but many say that fight is far from over.
Everybody's got to take some responsibility for the survival of the kings in the Kenai River.
Fish wars have divided the community for years. So how do they find common ground?
Sponsorship for Frontiers with Rhonda McBride is provided by Kupik Corporation and Spinard Builders Supply. Alaska, where there are old triumphs, but also new frontiers, with challenges as great as the state itself, but a belief the best is yet to come, bringing you the faces, the places, and the spirit of the last frontier. This is Frontiers with Rhonda McBride.
Welcome to this follow-up Frontiers program where we revisit the Kenai Fish Wars, in which the sport and commercial fishing industries have been duking it out for decades. The Battleground, an initiative spearheaded by a group called the Alaska Fisheries Conservation Alliance. Their mission to ban set netting in Cook Inlet. Opponents called it ballot box biology. Supporters said it would help save Kenai River kings. So fast forward, a New Year's Eve state Supreme Court decision which threw out the ballot measure on constitutional grounds. So the big question on the Kenai, what happens next? It's between the seasons on the Kenai Peninsula, with mountains blanketed in snow and the salmon fishing industry mostly dormant. But when it comes to the Kenai Fish Wars, the debate is always hot, even after the recent Supreme Court decision on set netting.
My relief is the fact that we haven't shut down an industry. We can't pick one industry over another.
I think all user groups ought to take a little bite on this.
Many of the locals say they've lost their appetite for the Kenai Fish Wars. So does the court decision put an end to this?
The challenges will remain as they've been in the last 3 or 4 decades.
As the Kenai area biologist for commercial fisheries, Pat Shields often plays referee.
The fish wars will remain, and in some aspect that's a good thing.
Yeah. Because that means there's fish to fight about. The numbers from this past season point to a turnaround in the king run. This after cutbacks in fishing opportunity for both commercial set netters and sport fishers. Still, kings are far below their historic numbers, and each group blames the other.
The initiative felt like a group doing something to another group as opposed to with another group.
Senator Peter Machicki hopes to find the middle ground.
Fish wars aren't new. They're probably not going away, but I do think this opportunity should be used wisely.
Machicki wants the legislature to look at buying back set net permits and land leases, perhaps on beaches where the most kings are caught.
LA freshman, biochem major.
Jim Butler's crew is not after the kings, but red salmon, which run at the same time. But in recent years, set netters have lost fishing time to protect the kings. But for Butler, that's better than being voted out of business.
These are the lines we use to move our nets up and down the beach on the tide.
Butler says a voluntary buyback might work for some, or at least compensate fishermen for their investment. In this shed alone, Butler says he has almost $200,000 tied up in fishing gear and other equipment, and the initiative put his commercial fishing operation in limbo.
Do we replace our nets? Do we replace our lines? How much do we put into getting ready?
Now he can plan ahead.
It's pretty important for the state of Alaska.
Butler says the court decision upheld the right of a commercial fishery to exist.
I think this was a good day not just for the set net fishermen, but for harvesters all across the state.
The anglers who fought for the initiative say the biggest losers in the court decision are the kings, which will continue to be caught in set nets. They say the proof of their destructiveness can be found here at the Soldotna Visitor Center, home of the largest king ever caught.
People are like, wow, that's really the real fish.
Les Anderson caught this world record 97.25 pound king in 1985. Since then, the really big kings are rare. Whoa. Back at Louis, you can see hunting and fishing is a big part of this region's identity and culture, going back to the late 1800s.
What I do know is that our community thrives when fishing thrives.
While the fish fights are far from over, businesses say the bottom line is that gear groups need to sit at the same table and work things out.
When all of those are clicking together, we're on top of the world.
We asked Bob Penny, the main architect of the SetNet initiative, for comment, but he declined. Penny is a well-known businessman, a long-time advocate for sports fishing on the Kenai, and founder of the Alaska Fisheries Conservation Alliance. Well, to get the Alliance's perspective, we went back to the Alaska Supreme Court arguments in August, where the attorney for the Alliance said Alaskans have a long history of weighing in on natural resources, so there's precedent for the initiative.
This court has recognized that voters have a constitutional right to exercise direct democracy. And so this court has said that voters are permitted to consider initiatives that regulate natural resources. Voters are permitted to consider initiatives that affect allocations. Voters are permitted to consider initiatives that create beneficiaries.
The sport fishing group which sponsored the initiative says that it will keep on fighting, possibly through the federal courts. Its president, Joe Connors, has said that there's a lot at risk: the future of the king salmon run and the future of the economy. So we ran this story on Connors Lodge last summer before the Supreme Court heard the case, but we thought it was worth a second look.
So we're River Mile 36.
That's 36 miles from Cook Inlet. Ryan Tompkins teaches school in Oregon, but every summer for the past 13 years, he comes back to work as a fishing guide for the Big Sky Charter and Fish Camp. A nice change of scenery. And the extra income makes it possible for his wife to stay home with the kids. He and another guide, Angelo Brennan, also enjoy fishing for themselves.
So we're fishing for silver salmon.
The silvers are starting to show up, but don't appear to be in this spot, so they move on. Ryan used to show up for fishing in June, but since the king numbers have dwindled, so has the work.
In July, we've had to be creative. You know, there's been a few years where we just haven't even been allowed to fish for kings. So we've become trout fishermen or sockeye fishermen. And
since that time, some of the smaller lodges have gone out of business, but there are still some on this stretch of river that do very well.
We get a lot of Europeans, a lot of people from Germany. This summer we've Lithuania.
Visitors who spent thousands, not just on the Kenai, but elsewhere in the state. Visitors lured here by the Big Sky Fish Camp. Here's one of your cabins. What's the economic impact of this cabin to the Kenai Peninsula Borough?
That's a good question. It's significant. We pay property tax, we pay sales tax to the borough.
Joe Connors pays the borough about $15,000 a year in taxes, and the borough just raised the valuation on his property by $80,000. Aside from the Hacienda Happy Jose, Joe Connors has 8 cabins in all.
Keep it up, girls!
One group of guests has just come back from a trip on the river, so there are lots of sockeyes to deal with. Joe Connors runs a pretty tight operation. Next, the salmon go on display. A California hospital administrator who brought both friends and family made quite a haul. Plenty of salmon and lots of good memories.
All right, baby, 1, 2, 3.
Next, Joe's crew cleans the fish and fillets them. The salmon will be frozen and sent home with the guests so they can continue to enjoy their Alaskan experience.
This is Donnie Pratt, good buddy of mine. This is his father, 81 years old. First time to Alaska. It's been a dream of his life to come up and fish on the Kenai.
Rod Hanners has been coming to this camp since he was a child. He tries to make it here every year.
All told, I'm going to say we probably put 15 to 20,000 into the local economy.
That's just for this trip. At the Soldotna Fred Meyer's, Hanner's group spent about $1,000 on the first day of their visit.
We make sandwiches every day. What do we make? 10 sandwiches every day, and we got to buy all that. And of course, we have a few cocktails while we're here.
While Hanner's is happy to catch the reds, he misses the kings.
It worries us totally for the whole fishery because that's the joy that we come up here for.
I'm a retired professor.
Joe Connors wants to show us some of the big trophy fishes in the lodge.
Each of them has a story.
The biggest is named Gus. He was caught in the 80s. What do these big salmon represent as far as the uniqueness of the fishery?
They make the Kenai what it is, the big king salmon. Nowhere in the world do you have fish like that.
So if the setnetters are gone, do you think we'll see kings like these again?
Absolutely.
Those pushing for a setnet ban say the burden of conservation falls too heavily on the river, where fishing has been sharply restricted, and that's hurt the fishing lodges all along this river.
I think the way the Constitution reads is that the resources belong to the people. It doesn't even say what people. It doesn't say Alaskans, it doesn't say Americans, it just says to the people.
And ultimately the next generation.
Show me your fish. Tell me what you got.
Sockeye?
Well, right now I'm the third generation.
Angelo Brennan is Joe Connor's grandson, so this river has been a thread throughout his life.
I hope that someday this can be a 5, 6, 7 generation family affair.
Fishing and family, two passions that flow throughout this river, no matter what side of this debate you're on. Up next, we visit with a family of setnetters. The Blossoms have been working a stretch of beach near Ninilchik for 4 generations.
The Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium provides comprehensive health services for Alaska Native and American Indian people across our state. In addition to world-class care at the Alaska Native Medical Center, our work delivers health services for rural Alaska. From cutting-edge technology for the best care possible, to modern construction of clean water systems and health clinics, to health training and outreach that honors our culture, our vision is that Alaska Native people are the healthiest people in the world.
At Spenard Builder Supply, we know it takes a lot of ingredients to get it just right. That's why we have design centers in every store to personalize the most important rooms in your home. We'll help you select cabinets, faucets, and appliances that fit your style. So all you have to worry about is how much oregano goes in Mom's pasta sauce. Spenard Builder Supply. Building for life.
Now offering financing with no payments or interest for 12 months. Visit our design experts today at your local Spenard Builder Supply.
Congratulations to KTVA 11 News, winners of 9 Goldie Awards from the Alaska Broadcasters Association. KTVA is there when news happens. From this summer's devastating sockeye fire to investigative research, honored for groundbreaking coverage of Alaska sports. From Seward to Nome, delivered by Alaska's finest sportscaster. And recognized for creating new frontiers, KTVA 11 News is there when news happens. Be there.
Talk about fishing being in the blood. The Blossom family set nets on a beach about 10 miles north of Ninilchik. We told you their story last summer back when they were worried that the initiative would go before voters this year. They're among 700 set net permit holders with some fish in the fight. Does the view here ever get old?
No. Nope, I tell people when I go out on my boats in the morning,
I got the best office view in the world.
Actually, Doug Blossom would prefer some wind and rain to help drive the salmon into his nets. But either way, the Blossoms are ready to fish.
Probably one of the first lessons you learn real quick setting nets is the tides. You know, we have the second largest tides in the world.
There are also tides of change. If voters ban the setnet fishery here, the life the Blossoms have loved and known could be swept away forever.
I just really think it teaches young people work ethics. I know it has with my boys and daughter.
The Blossoms operate 21 setnets on this beach, so it takes a lot of teamwork.
And Brittany is our youngest kid. She's going to be a freshman at Soldotna High School.
Doug's youngest son, Boomer, is here today. He has 2 other sons who also help out. Set netting put all 3 through college.
So pretty much all still in the family. And they're all 4th generation.
In a lot of ways, the Blossoms remind you of a farm family, but instead of fields, they harvest the seed. Doug's nephew, Cody, is the youngest crew member, and even though he's only 10, you can learn a lot from him about how set nets work.
The nets sort of go into a bag shape. The fish go into the bag, and the web is the color of the water, so they cannot see it.
Cody learned most of what he knows about set netting from his grandfather, Doug Sr., who died 2 years ago.
Whenever I asked, and it was a calm day, he would take me out on the boat with him.
Do you miss him?
Yes. Yes, I miss him.
Cody's grandfather was a little boy when his parents started set netting in 1948. As a kid, he worked hard, even into his 70s.
You always try to impress Grandpa with your work ethic.
Boomer's parents believe his grandfather's example gave him the discipline to get through college and play on the UAA basketball team.
You know, your parents will ask you to do something, and you'll kind of procrastinate or kind of argue about it before you do it. For him, when he asked you to do something, you did it.
While the crews head out for another round of fish picking, lunch is in the works at the Blossoms summer cabin.
We're gonna do a stir fry.
The Blossoms not only feed their own family, but other young people they've hired.
We've got to try to time it so that it's done when they come in.
Mary Blossom, Doug's wife, keeps an eye out for the crew. If they catch a lot of fish, it may delay their return to shore, so lunch might have to go on the back burner. But when it comes to the SetNet initiative, Mary feels the heat.
I'm afraid, I guess.
Afraid of what will happen if the SetNet initiative gets on the ballot.
The propaganda and the politics are going to take over, and we will just kind of get lost.
Mary's sister-in-law, Debbie, also worries.
This is part of our culture and history, and there's no reason for us not to continue for the next 100 years.
Setnetter opponents say their fight is all about the next 100 years to ensure king salmon runs survive into the future. The Blossoms believe setnetters are scapegoats caught in a web of politics.
I think it would be just a real shame for set netting to ever go away.
But Blossom says he tries not to think about that too much.
I think the stress was really tough on my dad, especially the last few years of his life.
So for now, the Blossoms and their crew sit down to lunch, enjoying the food and each other.
It's totally family for us.
If we let our biologists manage the fishery biological, I think there'll be fish for my grandchildren and kids to come.
You've heard some different perspectives, so what's next? Our guest Andrew Jensen is here. He's followed the Kenai Fish Wars for years, and he's going to analyze the implications of the Supreme Court decision for all fisheries in Alaska.
We have a story of 27 families that put 18 months of their lives into building a village, a home for themselves and their future. Our Inupiaq culture goes back thousands of years, carried by a strong sense of community. Our relationship with our natural surroundings is at the heart of our culture. By investing in future generations through development that is balanced with the love of our land, the Kupi Corporation brings together traditions of the past with visions of the future.
I don't think I could ever pay back what Pick has given my family. And knowing that Pick gave us the tools to help him be able to say, I love you for the first time, or say, Mama for the first time. I feel overwhelmed with happiness to know Pick was right there this whole time and has given me the tools that I needed. He's gonna grow into this amazing, bright child.
We taught him how to hit a baseball, how to hit a receiver, the strike zone, the net. You taught him how to hit the upper corner. You even taught him how to hit the open man. But how much time have you spent teaching him what not to hit?
There's an old saying, everybody complains about the weather, though nobody does anything about it. Well, you can't blame a guy for trying. We know you can't change the weather, but you can change the way you look at it. And while you can study all the models you want, eventually, you're gonna have to go outside. Carlos Fora and KTVA 11 weather. Be there.
Joining us now, Andrew Jensen, editor of the Alaska Journal of Commerce. And Andrew, you have followed this fish fight for a long time. But before we go to the Supreme Court analysis, just want to ask you a question. There are fish fights all over the place, but what makes the Kenai one stand out?
Well, it just doesn't end. You know, I mean, around the states, they just Board of Fisheries issues. You know, they have their cycles every 3 years. And so, for example, maybe in Prince William Sound or in Southeast, you know, they have their fights every 3 years. But Cook Inlet, I mean, it's just nonstop, whether it's ballot initiatives, out-of-cycle agenda requests, you know, where the meeting is going to be, King Salmon Task Force. Like, the Cook Inlet fishery sucks up so much oxygen at the Board of Fisheries that it does make it unique among the fish fights in user groups in Alaska.
So let's talk about the Supreme Court decision. You know, is there hope that it will end the fish fight? We have, you know, it was basically over this article in the Constitution.
Right, and hopefully this would put an end to the effort to use initiatives to manage the fishery, because as you can see there in the Constitution, you cannot use an initiative to make or repeal appropriations. And
now, their argument was that this wasn't an appropriation, but an argument about the gear type.
Well, yes, but the Supreme Court looked through that and said that, yes, you're right, you're talking about a gear type, but in effect it is an allocation, because every other fishery would then benefit from it, and that the state's interest, you know, as the graphic says there, all the other fisheries would gain and one group would lose, and therefore it appeals to self-interest and becomes a giveaway program. And the Supreme Court has held that you cannot put a giveaway program on the ballot that appeals to the citizens' self-interest, especially when it comes to appropriating what is a state resource. And the Supreme Court held in 1996 that salmon are a state resource that may not be appropriated by initiative, and they found that this case did.
Everybody wants this resource, from dip netters to anglers to commercial fishermen. But I guess what is central about this decision as far as commercial fisheries go? Because, you know, we've seen them here for a long time. Other users have come later.
Well, that's true, and that's one thing that commercial fishermen are pointing out as far as the Kenai River goes, is that we've been fishing, you know, these runs for 100 years or more, and the king salmon runs have been fine. The guides have been around for about 30 years, and now we've seen a decline in the last few years. So, you know, but then the commercial guys or the sport guys would say, well, you guys are on the beach catching them before they can get in, now you're hurting us in river. And so there's this back and forth where they both have sides of the argument that are legitimate. And that's why you would hope that there could be some common ground that could be found at some point. But when you look at just the history of fisheries management anywhere, there's always a constant tug of war and back and forth between different user groups regarding allocations, gear, fishing time, and everything. So it's natural to be these kind of battles, but the Cook Inlet one has really, it stands apart in the
well,
fish
we have a brief time out in the fish wars with the Supreme Court decision, and Senator Peter Micciche says that it's a valuable window of time to use to explore the buybacks. What do you think about that?
Well, I don't think the state's in a position right now to be appropriating money for something like this. I mean, because that would take a state appropriation to do some kind of a buyback program, and so I don't think that's a realistic solution. And I think that you know, people fish when it's economic to fish. If it's not economic to go fish, then they don't go out. So the value of the permits is low right now, and
You think there are just too many challenges. Now, the other thing that the setnetters say is, hey, if you're going to have a voluntary buyback for our permits, let's do something about that river that gets congested with sports anglers every year more so. That's their claim.
Right, because there is no restriction on the number of guide licenses. While there is a restriction on the number of setnet permits, there is not a restriction on the number of guides that can be on the river. And even some of the sport guys have talked about in the past about having some sort of a limited entry for guide permits. So if you're trying to reduce effort to take some pressure off the king salmon, then it would only be natural to pull back on the number of guides and the number of hooks that are in the Kenai River, because they are, you know, they are on the spawning grounds or in their habitat where they're making that final push, where it's very important they get to those spawning grounds.
And they say they've given up a lot, you know, in terms of being able to actually bring home the fish. They've had a lot of catch and release. But one of the things, you know, they make the argument that the reason we have no big kings is because the setnetters have snatched them up. And then the other side says we have no big kings because the sports fishermen have targeted the bigger ones.
Well, you know, and in the segments that you ran earlier, looking at those, the 97-pound king, that was caught during the early run, which is even worse shape than the late run of king salmon. And so, yes, there's been a trophy fishing opportunity that's been marketed for 30 years by the tourism, by the guided sport industry. Come to the Kenai, you can catch a giant fish. So naturally, if you have somebody come and pay you a lot of money thinking they're going to catch a trophy fish, you have to go out there and try to find that trophy fish. And
now, one thing before we run out of time is, what do you think about Bob Penny? Is there anything positive in what he's doing here?
Well, I think he does care about the fishery. I think he does care about the Kenai king salmon and making sure that they're around and that they continue to be a source of food and recreation and everything for the people of Alaska, for the people who come to visit Alaska. But I do think that he's misguided in trying to eliminate another user group in order to protect the king salmon.
All right, well, we'll continue this conversation on the web, hear more about Bob Penny's role in this critical debate. The frontiers of cooperation, well, they're not always easy to tackle, but we can always hope. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.